Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen out there in internet land. How are you all? This is your friend, Charlie Hunter, coming to you from a cool and humid Bellows Falls, Vermont on August 4th, 2020. How are you all? Delighted you could be here with us. Today is a What's on the Easel day, where we talk a little bit about the images I've been working on and what the process has been. You'll notice here I am brandishing my Badger Blender. Badger Blenders are things of wonder, ladies and gentlemen. Look at that. To give you a sense of the scale of it, I couldn't fit this in my mouth. It's larger than an ice cream cone, ladies and gentlemen. And it's very, very, very important when trying to do skies in the manner in which I paint. So my beloved Miss Betty Sue, and all of you should definitely check out Betty Sue's music at www.bettysue.com. We'll have her as a guest on one of these days. But Betty Sue is manning the boards in the background down there in Austin, Texas, while I'm up here in Bellows Falls, Vermont. So Betty Sue, could you put up the first slide? It would be a lovely thing to see that first slide. Here we go. Oh, we get to see the whole slideshow. Oh, it's back to me. But the first slide is of the painting, the source material of the painting that I'm working on. And that is a small church in New Mexico. There's a wonderful photographer named Bob Christensen, and I would highly recommend folks look at his work. I discovered it on Flickr. He has published a book called New Mexico Vernacular, Artifacts of Enchantment. And his aesthetic is very, very similar to mine. And because of the COVID virus, I am unable to travel to New Mexico as I was planning to this spring and take my own photos. So I contacted Bob Christensen and asked if I could use his work as source material. Because what he likes to do is photograph things straight on. So we, the viewer, are having a direct conversation, as it were, with that thing. So this is a small church, and that spoke to me immediately because my gallery in Santa Fe, McClary Fine Art, Ezra's going to pass through. Hi, Ezra. Bye, Ezra. My gallery in Santa Fe does very well with images of vernacular New Mexico architecture. So working with Bob, with his images, it's a perfect fit. So this is the source photograph. Now what I did, next slide please, Betty Sue. I did a drawing of the, no I didn't, I did not. I projected the photograph using old Mac, a MacBook from about 15 years ago, and a projector that I have, projected the image. Now, ladies and gentlemen, that seems like cheating, doesn't it? Well, it's one of the old techniques of the great American illustrators. They, almost all of them, projected. Make of it what you will. I don't approve of projecting unless you could actually draw it. And that is why I think having the plein air practice and the drawing practice is utterly important, because you can make a big mess doing a projection painting. And unless you know how to draw, all this is a tool. If you don't know how to draw, you're going to have an impossible time. So go ahead, do a projection. See if I care. Next slide, please, Betty Sue. Now this is hard to see. I should have taken the picture closer up, but this is the drawing. Actually, go back one, Betty Sue. Go back to that previous one. Yeah, that gives a better sense of it. You can see the pencil marks on the surface. This is a 24 by 24 surface that is, it's gator board cut from a larger sheet using a T-square and box cutters. And then it is covered with muslin from the fabric store, glued down with Amsterdam acrylic binder gel, and then 3 coats of Amsterdam artist grade acrylic gesso. Then do the projection, and I just use a hard pencil, and I'm drawing very lightly. You can see the pencil marks over on the right-hand side by the door area. And then I put a coat of matte medium on top of that. So then I can really beat up the canvas, but my drawing marks are there for me to work on. Now, this is not how I work when working from in plein air. In plein air, I just start painting. This is only because I'm doing a very careful rendering of a very particular building. So then the matte medium goes down, it dries, I let it dry overnight. And then the next day, I start filling in, this is using Cobra water-mixable Van Dyke brown. It's the only color I'm using in this suite of paintings. I start putting in my darkest darks, as it were. Next slide. So that's the full 24 by 24 up on the easel. Next slide. Here it is. This is it on the easel with the first pass completed. So note how much it looks like a watercolor at this point, ladies and gentlemen. All I am using is the Cobra Van Dyke brown and water. I'm actually using a watercolor brush for like those big passes up on what it is an adobe. You can think of it as an adobe structure with a wooden hat on it. And the wood, just like in New England with covered bridges, uncovered bridges in the early 1820s, they'd be built and the timbers would rot. And so they put a roof on top of the timbers, and thus the New England covered bridge was created. This is a similar thing. Adobe melts in the rain, so you put a hat on it. But you see just how vague the hills behind are on either side of the structure, and how vague the textures of the foliage in the foreground are. All the adobes, I am not worrying about getting the values exactly right. All I'm trying to do is get that varied texture that spoke to me in the photograph. And I'm really letting the paint work as it wishes to. I work on a drawing table when I'm doing this kind of painting. So the painting is at a very mild angle, probably about a 20 degree, between 10 and 20 degrees, so that things are not as prone to drip. Next slide, please. So there it is on the easel with kind of the second pass would be done, where I really go in doing the darkest darks. The hat that's a lot of kind of out of the paint thickness, using my squeegee to get those really straight lines, cutting into that previous pass, the very watercolory looking one, that had thoroughly dried. So each of these is like a day or 2 days later. When you're doing the thin watery passages, it dries basically overnight. But I think I still was generally allowing 2 days between a big pass like this, where I'm really starting to get my darks in there. Let's see, Marty Hill Bledsoe, matte medium. Can that help wiping out Cobra oils? Having trouble following your latest video, getting back to the lightest value. Okay, very good question. Yeah, it does make it. It does make it slicker, so it is easier to wipe down. But really, my trick for getting back to the substrate color, that is the color of the gesso. What you're talking about, Marty, I believe, is when you put the Van Dyke brown down, and then you take a damp paper towel and try to wipe it out, and it leaves a stain. If that happens, what I do is I take some water-mixable safflower oil, or it could be water-mixable linseed oil. It doesn't really matter. I just use the Winsor Newton Artisan water-mixable safflower oil. I take some of that on a Q-tip or on a clean paper towel, and I rub that into the substrate, into the surface, into the stained part of the surface. I let it sit for a few seconds, and then I take a clean paper towel, I wet it slightly with clean water, and then I wipe that area out. If it's a very small area, I would get another clean Q-tip and dampen that slightly. You don't want it sopping wet, but dampen it slightly, and then you rub it out, and that removes that staining color. Now, Corey wonders if there's a reason or preference between using the muslin-covered waterboard, gator board, versus the Frederick multimedia boards. I like the texture of muslin slightly more than I like the Frederick's multimedia boards texture. That said, the Frederick's multimedia boards are the closest thing I have found, and Betty Sue has found in our research, to be the equal of the making your own. But yeah, the Frederick's multimedia boards are great. Get the multimedia board. If you get the linen covered ones, the texture's too rough. But the one they call multimedia board is very, very, very similar to the muslin surface. Okay, so Diane wondered about the matte medium. Yeah, the nice thing about matte medium is that then you can really wail on the surface, and you're still going to have that armature of the drawing in place. Do let the matte medium dry long enough. There is a temptation. There's a temptation to, because you're excited, you want to get going, you know. Temptation to put the medium down, and it's dry to the touch, and so you start working, and then it turns out it wasn't quite as dry as you thought it was. Wait overnight. Work on 3 paintings at the same time so you don't have that problem. Anyway, okay, so that's the second. The first full pass was that very watercolory looking one. This second one is much more drawing in the capabilities of the oil, of working basically with, I squeeze out a good sized dollop, at least the size of a quarter. That's one thing, you ladies and gentlemen. You guys tend to think that the paint is like $400 an ounce. The paint's expensive, but you gotta have enough paint on your palette, even if you're just working with one color. So I squeeze out a block about the size of a quarter. I'll have a little safflower oil over on the side for when I want oilier passages. But like in the darkest darks there, that is just straight out of the tube thickness. And I'm applying it with a synthetic flat. I like a synthetic flat with a fair amount of spring. The Rosemary evergreens they're a beautiful, beautiful brush. My only problem with them is the bellies of them are a little bit thick. I really love the Princeton Aspen brushes. Those have a much thinner belly, so it's really much more chisel-like. And Simply Simmons are a decent, cheap one. I also use Black Silver by Dynasty because I can get them from a teacher's supply warehouse for about $2 each. Get a nice, good number 24. Mustafa, why do I prefer acrylic gesso over oil ground gesso? Because I'm working in water mixable oil. When I have worked with oil gesso, yes, with the oil ground, after a couple of years, or after about a year, innumerable tiny hairline cracks have shown up in the paint film. And the paint isn't in danger of falling off. It just has all these cracks in it. And I think it's because the water, even though it's an oil ground, the water gets into the fibers to a degree that it doesn't if there's the shield of the acrylic. So it stains a little easier. The acrylic ground stains a little bit easier than the oil ground, but the advantages of not having the surface crack in a year outweigh that difficulty. Next slide, Betty Sue. So this is the next pass. This is where we are today. Betty Sue, can we go back to me again? Just me, me, Charles. There we are. That's where, look at this brush. Very, very soft. There we go. Very, very soft. Badger Blender. I've had this one about 5 years, 6 years. The key thing, ladies and gentlemen, is to wash it very, very well in between uses. This has a little bit of paint buildup on it. I ran over from the studio with this at the time. Let's go back to the slide with the sky in. Yes. So this is where it is now. You'll note that the building, it feels to me, the building now feels so much more detailed than it did before. But that is contextual, ladies and gentlemen. I have barely worked more on the Adobe or the wooden hat. I've barely worked on it any more than the last two that you saw. What is now visible is, or what is now the illusion that has come into play, is that because it is in the larger context of sky and the landscape around it, it now appears to be highly detailed painting of wood and adobe. The thing I'm happiest about here, the sky really made me happy. Oh, Corey, what brand is the Badger brush? It is a Rosemary Company, ladies and gentlemen. Rosemary and Simi Jackson over in England. They go and catch the badgers themselves. They've got a whole backyard full of badgers. They go running around, catch them, pluck out the hairs, and boy, the badgers put up a fight. You should see their arms just covered in scars from the badgers. No, but no, they make a wonderful, wonderful brush. It's a lifetime brush. You know, I think it's quite an expensive brush, but it will last decades. Yep. Just got Simply Simon. Marty got the Simply Simon through my website. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, as we talk about all this, don't forget over on my website, there is under the store tab, it'll take you to basically all the materials I use. And the great thing about that is if you order off my website, I get a kickback. And that means the cats don't starve. So if you buy your art supplies from anywhere else other than my website, if you hear the mews, the plaintive mews of small cats, that's on you. Anyway, so the sky is taking Van Dyke Brown. Remember, all of this is one color of paint. Just the Van Dyke Brown, that semi-transparent, warm, dark brown. So I take the wet out of the tube paint, pour out onto my glass palette a puddle, a small puddle, maybe the size of 2 quarters, of the Artisan, Winsor Newton Artisan water-mixable safflower oil. And then with a chip brush, the hardware store chip brush, I kind of muddle the two together. And it's a very, very wet mixture, the texture of salad dressing. And I just brush it on roughly, following my very, very light pencil sketches of basically where I see the sky is being. It's kind of puddled on the surface at that moment. So I may press a damp paper towel into it to remove a little bit of the oil. And then I just start brushing with the Badger Blender. And those edges, those nice feathered edges, they just magically appear. And the Badger Blender, it removes those brush strokes. So it looks almost photographic. It's just a way of smoothing things. It's a fan brush. It's just a very, it's a very bushy fan brush. So it doesn't, fan brushes leave the marks. This doesn't. It's just wonderful. Also, note how the far hills in this piece now actually appear really carefully rendered. They're not. Those are the same far hills that were in the total watercolory looking thing. This will be up on YouTube as soon as, later today. It'll be up on YouTube forever, so you'll be able to toggle back and forth between the photos. Next time I will have them closer up. I apologize for having the photos being sort of small. But the other thing I wanted to point out is that on the right-hand side, the texture of the bushes, the scrub in the shadows in the foreground, that's just done with taking those wooden painting keys that you get on pre-stretched canvases and just scraping the surface with that. And that disturbing of the paint really resembles nature. It's a remarkable thing. Doing these paintings, I don't feel like it's the biggest expression of my own art, but it's tremendous fun. It's more like when I was a kid making car models, because it's more of a series of techniques that get you these effects. And once you have them, you can apply them. And it's fairly predictable how it's going to work. But still, like when I put in that sky yesterday, it was thrilling. It was thrilling to all of a sudden have that structure, boom, come into focus. Play around with these techniques. You don't have to have them being in service to an image initially. You can just experiment with them and say, oh, I can look at this. If I do this, oh, it looks kind of like lichen on a rock, something like that. On this one, I'll probably be working more on the door. The door is a little bit unfinished, but I am quite happy with the sky. I am quite happy with the hat. Oh, that's one other thing I wanted to say is you gotta when you're putting down paint in out of the tube thickness, you have to let it set several days before you start putting in the sky around it, because the oil will reactivate that paint if it's not fully dry, and then you'll have dark trails of what used to be roof going out into your sky, and you don't want that. The Simply Simmons brush, or in my case, it's the Black Silver by Dynasty, but Blick doesn't stock Black Silver by Dynasty, which is why Simply Simmons are the ones that are available on my website. But by having that oily mixture on the Simply Simmons flat, on your wide flat, you can do that line of the cap on the bell tower. That is just the white roof is just, that's the surface. It's the substrate. But the oil on the brush, the oil and pigment on the chisel brush, pulled that way, makes that beautiful sharp line. Marty says, how would I handle this guy if I was doing the plein air painting? I do tend to work thin no matter what. The way I tend to do it plein air, the highlights would probably be a little more worked over. The luxury I get doing this as a projection painting is that just like in a watercolor, you know where you're keeping your whitest whites. And if I was doing this plein air, well, you should get my video. That's what you should do. You should get my video. That explains how I'd approach this plein air. You basically slop paint over the whole thing and then remove everything that doesn't look like what you want down there. Diane O'Connor says one thing she's trying to learn is when to stop. She tends to overwork. I do too, Diane. One of the great lessons, one of my great ongoing life lessons is what I now call, and in the video I talk about this a lot, is to take your coffee, step back, and go, and let the painting paint itself. We have this, our insecurity as human beings, and I mean, we always feel like we're pretenders of being artists. So our inner critic is like, well, if you're not painting, you're not an artist. Most of painting is, or a good portion of painting, once you basically know how to draw, you got to know how to draw. That's, if you're doing depictive art, you got to know how to draw. But and that's just practice. But once you have that down, remember the Miles Davis quote that it's not the notes you play, it's the notes you don't play. This painting, I've kept track of exactly how long I've spent on this. It's multiple sessions, but each session is seldom more than an hour and a half. So they're probably 4 or 5, yeah, they're 5 sessions, I would say. But it's not a huge amount of time spent on this painting. I have multiple pieces going at any time. And that keeps me from overworking it. And J.M. Hansen says, did I say that the sky first or the hat beings the darker areas need to dry longer? I did the hat before I did the sky. Because to do the sky, this is a painting about that structure, right? So if I did the sky first, it would kind of define the structure, whereas I did the structure and then put the sky in, and I could decide how dark, how light I wanted to go. How I'll very often do kind of a radiating beams of light subtly behind, kind of coming away from the structure. Because the structure was done, it allowed me to play with the look I wanted for the sky more, as opposed to doing it the other way around. Next slide, please, Betty Sue. Okay, this painting and the painting after that were all still being completed when I started on this new one. So you'll see here 3 paintings that are going to go to the gallery in Santa Fe, McClary Fine Art, for their autumn show. This is another Bob Christensen photograph of a closed down little store. And I just loved it. I mean, who doesn't love those old Coca-Cola and Pepsi-Cola signs? And it's just such pure vernacular. Look at how the hat on this isn't even centered on the adobe structure. It's kind of canted over to one side. I love this. Okay, next slide. So this was me working on it. Again, it's a 24 by 24. I have a printout of the photo. I don't care particularly how high, they need to have a certain amount of clarity so I can see what I'm doing. But one of the printouts I had was kind of underexposed, and then I blew it out and printed it out again. So I'd have kind of 2 worlds of textures to look at. So again, I projected this, did the pencil drawing, painted matte medium on it, let it sit overnight, went to work. This one I'm working darker darks earlier than I did on the most recent one. Oh, Kathy Teasdale wonders why I chose the previous composition. Again, I can't be out in New Mexico this year, so I can't be collecting. My own source photography. The Bob Christensen, the way he does this straight-on portraits of these structures, that very much appeals to my aesthetic, and it just feels I like doing these portraits. His source material is available. This is, if it was at an angle, I would feel sort of like I was poaching his vision. This has so little, I mean, it's composed, but the decision is just a straight-on look. There's nothing radical about where the horizon line is or how we are choosing to view it. Back to where we were, Betty Sue, if we could. Okay, so working on this one, very oily over there on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, look at that hillside. That is very, very watery. I was thinking what I wanted to play with on this is having that far hillside be almost like a watercolor, but I ended up changing it. Next slide, please. This is second pass. Basically, all the composition is in place. I am playing around with where the emphasis is going to be in the foreground. And that's all just watery paint brushed in with the chip brush from the hardware store that I've gotten broken in enough so it's no longer shedding. Next slide. Okay, this is, I believe, yes, this is the completed painting. Now you'll see that the rocks and bushes on the right-hand side, that hillside is no longer as watery as it was. I was going to try to leave it in that very watery state, but Betty Sue, being a singer-songwriter, her analogy was, it's a beautiful verse to a song, but it's a really good verse, but it's from a different song. So I swallowed my pride and put in some oilier passages to unite it. So it has about the same level of finish as the rest of the structure. Now again, there is not a lot of detail in this. This is the illusion of detail with very, very precise, totally tracing the Coca-Cola and the Pepsi-Cola logos. I blew that up to the exact size that that was going to be. I'd already projected the whole structure, right? And done all that painting. The logos, I then did a printout of the logos at 100% size. And then took vine charcoal, rubbed it over the back of the piece of paper that had the printout of the logos, took my chamois and kind of removed excess of the vine charcoal, taped it down on the surface, traced out the logo, and then painted in. I also put the merest hint of transparent oxide red in the Coca-Cola logo and the top of the Pepsi-Cola logo, and the merest glaze of ultramarine blue in the bottom of the Pepsi logo. That's one of my favorite quotes is Don Demers, the great marine painter. Don Demers says, I'll do a marine scene, and if it doesn't sell, then I go and I put the seagulls in. Then I send it out to another gallery. If it doesn't sell, I go ahead and I put the sailboat in, send it to another gallery. If it still doesn't sell, I get it back and I put the red buoy in. Putting these little bits of color in the logos of the Coca-Cola and Pepsi. It's kind of hokey to put a little spot of color in, but I'm not doing these to be my great artistic statement. I'm doing these so I can eat, so the cats can eat. No, the art supplies are so the cats can eat. This is so I can eat. I'm counting on you people in Santa Fe. I get so hungry. Buy my painting, please. Anyway, so this is where that one's at. Next slide, please. This is actually from a WPA photograph. Russell Lee, one of the great WPA photographers. This was a church, one of these beautiful vernacular churches. Oh, little blow up of it. Again, this is probably the second or third pass. And then look how it changes when we put the sky in. Next slide, Betty Sue. Boom, same painting. All of a sudden, I guess some work was done on the hillside in the back, but look at how it places it in context. And once again, that oily process I was talking about, and then blending with the Badger Blender. But the top here, again, is just the substrate, ladies and gentlemen. And the crosses are all pulled out with Q-tips, especially that one, the cross on the top of the cupola against the sky. That was pulled out with Q-tip. And then I think, because the Q-tip is a little bit rounded, I think I did go back in, carefully matching the titanium white of the acrylic gesso, but with oil, I matched the titanium white and did the sharpened edge of the edges of the corners of the cross. And next slide, Betty Sue. Oh, that's it. That's it. Good. We are timed beautifully. Thank you so much for joining us, ladies and gentlemen. If you've got more questions, it'll be up on YouTube in the next hour or so. Happy to answer questions there, or on the Facebook. Please join us every Tuesday for the Reasonably Fine Art Talk. Buy my art supplies so the cats get to eat. Buy my video so I get to eat. Buy my paintings in Santa Fe so I get to take Betty Sue out to a nice dinner when I finally get to see her again. Thanks so much. It's a joy doing these, and I'm honored that you choose to watch. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.